What if I told you that Hollywood's most beloved star just exposed one of the biggest airline scandals without even trying? You're about to hear a story that no one saw coming, a moment that left an entire airport in stunned silence and an airline employee regretting everything. It all started with a routine flight, just another day, another passenger. But what this airline worker didn't know, the woman she just humiliated in front of a crowd, was Keanu Reeves' mother. And when Keanu found out, let's just say, he didn't raise his voice, he didn't cause a scene, but the moment he stepped forward, the entire power dynamic flipped in an instant. What did he say that left everyone frozen in shock? And how did a simple check-in go so terribly wrong? Stick around, because this might just be the most unforgettable moment in airport history. If you love exclusive stories like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because we're diving deep into Hollywood's most shocking moments. Now let's get into it. Airports are strange places, aren't they? A mix of excitement, frustration, and sometimes a little too much indifference. But what happened that day was something far beyond the usual travel inconveniences. Keanu Reeves's mother, a kind and unassuming elderly woman, stepped into the bustling terminal, unaware that she was about to be part of a moment that would leave everyone speechless. Dressed in a simple yet elegant outfit, she clutched her handbag, moving carefully through the crowd. Despite her quiet presence, there was an air of grace about her, something that should have commanded respect. But as she approached the check-in counter, that was far from what she received. The airline employee barely glanced at her, tapping on the keyboard with a level of disinterest that was almost insulting. And then it happened. A dismissive wave of the hand, a sigh so loud it made heads turn. The agent barely acknowledged her existence before muttering, "You're in the wrong line," despite the fact that she wasn't. Keanu's mother, always patient, politely asked for clarification. The response? A sharp, clipped tone, as if she was an inconvenience rather than a paying customer. Now, imagine this. A woman who has raised one of Hollywood's most respected and beloved actors, someone who has built his career on kindness and humility, being treated like she was nothing more than an afterthought. The irony was almost poetic, but at that moment, she had no idea that this seemingly mundane encounter was about to escalate into something far bigger than anyone could have predicted. What happened next? Well, let's just say that the airline employee would soon realize she had just made the biggest mistake of her career. As if the initial indifference wasn't bad enough, things quickly took a turn for the worse. The airline staff member, a young woman with an air of impatience, barely concealed her annoyance as she processed the elderly woman's ticket. Her fingers clacked against the keyboard with unnecessary force, her expression one of thinly veiled frustration. But then her lips curled into something between a smirk and a sneer. "Looks like there's been an issue," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Your seat has been reassigned." Keanu's mother blinked, tilting her head slightly. "Reassigned?" she asked, her voice gentle but firm. The employee barely held back an eye roll. "Yeah, overbooking. You don't have a seat anymore." No apology, no alternative solutions, just cold dismissal, as if she was doing her a favor by even explaining it. People nearby started to glance over. The tension in the air thickened, but the staff member didn't seem to care. If anything, she looked almost entertained by the situation. With a half-hearted shrug, she added, "You can wait for the next flight. Might be a few hours or longer. Your choice." There it was. The blatant disregard, the sheer disrespect, the assumption that, because this was just some older woman traveling alone, she wouldn't push back. But what she didn't realize, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that this wasn't just any elderly woman. This was Keanu Reeves' mother, and things were about to get very, very interesting. If the situation wasn't already bad enough, it was about to get downright humiliating. Keanu's mother, maintaining her usual poise, calmly asked if there were any alternative arrangements. She wasn't demanding or rude, just seeking a fair resolution. But that patience, it was met with nothing but hostility. The employee's voice grew louder. "I already told you there's nothing I can do," she snapped, loud enough for several nearby passengers to hear. Heads turned. A few people exchanged glances. The tension in the air became almost tangible. But the woman behind the counter wasn't finished. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head as if dealing with a troublesome child. Then, in a tone laced with condescension, she added, "Maybe you shouldn't be flying alone at your age." The words hung in the air like a slap. A stunned silence followed. A few gasps could be heard from the small crowd that had gathered. Keanu's mother, still dignified despite the blatant insult, opened her mouth as if to respond. But before she could, the employee waved a dismissive hand. "If you don't understand airline policies, maybe you should have someone explain them to you." That was it. That was the moment when the casual rudeness turned into outright public humiliation. The employee wasn't just indifferent anymore. She was actively trying to embarrass an elderly woman in front of a crowd. And while some onlookers were too stunned to intervene, others started whispering among themselves. They knew this was wrong. But what nobody realized, not the passengers, not the employee, not even Keanu's mother herself, was that just a few feet away, someone was watching. And that someone, he was about to change everything. Amid the chaos unfolding at the check-in counter, a man in a dark suit and sunglasses walked through the terminal, his steps calm, deliberate. His presence, though unassuming, carried an air of quiet confidence. Passengers brushed past him, oblivious to who he was. After all, in an airport packed with travelers rushing to their gates, even a global superstar could blend in, if he wanted to. Keanu Reeves had just arrived. He was scheduled to board a private flight, a routine departure that should have been quick and uneventful. He had no idea that just a few feet away, his mother was being disrespected in the most humiliating way possible. As he moved through the terminal, Keanu's mind was elsewhere. Perhaps on his upcoming commitments, maybe even on a script he was reviewing. But then something caught his attention. A voice, sharp and condescending, rang out over the usual airport noise. It wasn't the words themselves that made him stop, but the tone. A tone he knew all too well, the sound of someone being publicly belittled. His head turned, eyes narrowing slightly behind his sunglasses, his gaze locked onto the scene at the counter. An airline employee, exasperated and impatient. A small crowd watching, uncertain whether to intervene. And in the center of it all, his mother. For a brief moment he didn't move, didn't speak. He simply observed. He saw the way she stood, dignified but clearly uncomfortable. He watched as she attempted once again to reason with the employee, only to be met with more rudeness. And then something changed. Keanu's expression shifted. The easygoing, soft-spoken demeanor that the world knew and loved, it faded, replaced by something else, something colder, sharper. He adjusted his stance slightly, exhaled, and took a step forward. What happened next? Well, let's just say the employee had no idea she was about to make the worst mistake of her career. Keanu's footsteps were slow but deliberate as he approached the counter, his gaze fixed on the scene in front of him. He didn't announce his presence. He didn't clear his throat or call out. Instead, he simply watched. And what he saw made his expression harden. His mother stood there, composed but clearly uncomfortable, trying to de-escalate the situation. She wasn't arguing, wasn't raising her voice, just seeking fairness. But the airline employee? She wasn't interested in fairness. She leaned forward, arms crossed, her face twisted in frustration. "I don't have time for this," she muttered, her tone sharp enough to cut through the murmur of onlookers. "If you can't follow basic instructions, that's not my problem." Keanu's mother hesitated, shifting slightly on her feet. And then, before she could respond, The employee let out an exasperated laugh. "Do you even know how to use a phone? Call customer service like everyone else." That was it. That was the moment Keanu's patience ran out. Without a word, he stepped forward, his presence suddenly impossible to ignore. His mother turned, relief flickering in her eyes. The employee, still unaware of who he was, raised an eyebrow. "Sir, I'm helping someone right now. You'll have to wait your—" Then she stopped. Her mouth opened slightly, her breath caught in her throat. Recognition slammed into her like a freight train. Keanu Reeves. The color drained from her face. The same man whose mother she had just been ridiculing, whose patience she had worn thin, was now standing inches away from her. And judging by the look on his face, he had heard everything. For the first time since this ordeal began, the employee's confidence wavered. And in that brief, silent moment, she knew her fate was no longer in her hands. The silence that followed was suffocating. The once arrogant airline employee now stood frozen, her face pale as she realized the gravity of her mistake. Every inch of her body language screamed regret, but it was far too late for that. Keanu, still composed, turned his gaze to his mother. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression softening just for her. But when he looked back at the employee, the warmth was gone. His piercing stare held no anger, just an unsettling, unshakable calm. The kind of calm that only made things worse for the person on the receiving end. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Without breaking eye contact, he dialed a number. A beat of silence. Then, in a voice so low yet so commanding that it sent a chill through the air, he uttered just 6 words. "I want the manager at the counter, now." The effect was instantaneous. The employee's lips parted as if to protest, but no words came out. A nervous glance to her colleagues, a shuffle of feet. The crowd around them grew, whispers buzzing like static electricity. Somewhere in the distance, the sound of hurried footsteps. Then, as if materializing out of nowhere, the airline's regional manager appeared, his expression a mixture of confusion and barely contained panic. He looked from Keanu to the employee, then back again, his posture suddenly stiff and defensive. Keanu didn't yell, he didn't cause a scene, he didn't need to. Instead, with the quiet authority of a man who had seen and been through far worse, he simply stated the facts. "This woman," he gestured to his mother, "was just humiliated, ridiculed, and disrespected by your staff. I need to understand something. Is this how your airline operates?" The manager swallowed hard. The employee? She knew there was no talking her way out of this. And just like that, the power dynamic shifted. The manager's face was a study in panic. He could feel the weight of every pair of eyes locked onto him, waiting for his response. But how do you respond when you realize too late that one of the most respected men in Hollywood just caught your staff in an unforgivable act of disrespect? Keanu remained composed, his expression unreadable. He wasn't here to throw his weight around. He wasn't demanding special treatment. No, what made the moment so devastating was his sheer, unwavering calm, the kind of calm that said, "Fix this, now." The employee, on the other hand, she was unraveling before their eyes. Her posture stiffened, her lips parted in a desperate attempt to find an excuse, a justification, anything. But there was nothing she could say. She had been caught. I didn't know," she stammered. "I didn't realize she was your mother." The moment the words left her mouth, the damage was done. The crowd gasped. The manager's jaw tensed. Keanu's gaze sharpened. "So if she weren't my mother, this would be acceptable." His voice was quiet, but it sliced through the tension like a blade. The employee's face turned white. The manager, sensing the inevitable fallout, stepped forward immediately. "Mr. Reeves, I can assure you this does not reflect our company's values," he said, his voice shaking. "I will personally handle this situation." Keanu didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The decision had already been made. The employee was promptly removed from her position at the counter, her face a mask of regret and humiliation. The power shift was absolute. But Keanu, he didn't smirk. He didn't gloat. He simply turned to his mother, offering his arm as if nothing had happened. Because for him, this wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. With the situation handled, the tension in the air began to dissipate. But the lesson, that would linger far beyond this moment. The airline manager, still flustered, personally escorted Keanu's mother toward the first-class lounge, his words tumbling out in profuse apologies. He assured her that this was a deep misunderstanding, that corrective actions would be taken. But everyone watching knew the truth. This wasn't just about one bad employee, it was about something much bigger. Keanu, ever the gentleman, didn't push for special treatment. He didn't demand compensation or make a scene. That wasn't his style. He simply wanted his mother to receive the basic dignity she and everyone deserved. As they walked toward the gate, he leaned in slightly, giving her a warm smile. "Next time, just call me first, Mom." She chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I can handle myself." And that was the beauty of it. She could, but she shouldn't have to. No one should have to fight for respect, especially not someone who had done nothing but try to follow the rules. As they reached their destination, the whispers among the onlookers grew louder. Some people snapped discreet photos, others murmured about what they had just witnessed. But there was one undeniable takeaway. You never know who you're dealing with. And more importantly, you shouldn't have to, because kindness, respect, and basic human decency, that should be standard, no matter who you are. So, what do you think? Was this just a case of an employee having a bad day, or does this reveal something deeper about how people are treated based on appearances? Keanu Reeves didn't need to yell, threaten, or throw his weight around to make a statement. His calm but unshakable response was enough to turn the entire situation upside down. And if there's one takeaway from this, it's this. You never know who you're dealing with. So why not treat everyone with respect? Now I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Do you think Keanu handled this the right way? What would you have done in his place? Let's get the conversation going. And if you loved this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another jaw-dropping Hollywood moment. Oh, and before you go, click here for another shocking story you won't believe. I'll see you there.